Voices Untold.
I'm sorry, do I know you? My husband said that to me, standing in our hallway, after 9 years of marriage. He had been gone for 3 days. No call, no text, no note on the counter. His car was still in the driveway. His phone was still on the nightstand. His wallet was still exactly where he always left it. He had simply disappeared. And then, on Monday evening, he walked back through the front door like nothing had happened. He set his keys on the hook by the door. He took off his jacket. He hung it up. And then he turned around and looked at me like he had never seen me before in his life. I said his name, Chris. He looked at me the way you look at a stranger, politely, with careful uncertainty. He said it again. I'm sorry. Do I know you? I felt the floor move. I felt everything go completely still. My name is Adeline. I am 34 years old. I teach English at a high school in Nashville, Tennessee. I had been married to Chris for 9 years, and on that Monday evening in October, standing in the hallway of the house we had shared for 7 years, my husband looked at me like I was nobody. That was how it started. What I did not know then was that my husband remembered everything, every single thing. He just needed me to believe he didn't. I want to tell you about who Chris was before I tell you about who he became. Because it matters. It matters that he was good once. It matters that I loved him. I have spent a long time asking myself whether any of it was ever real, and I believe it was. In the beginning, it was completely real. I met Chris when I was 23, a mutual friend's birthday party in East Nashville. He was standing by the kitchen counter eating chips directly from the bag and laughing at something. I thought, I like this person immediately. He was funny, he was easy. He asked about my life and actually remembered what I said 2 weeks later. He brought me a book on our third date because I had mentioned an author once in passing. He paid attention. That was the thing about Chris. He paid attention to the small things. On that third date, I had mentioned that I loved old bookshops, the kind with narrow aisles and books stacked sideways on top of other books because there is no more shelf space. The kind that smells like paper and time. 2 weeks later, he took me to a place on Charlotte Avenue I had never been. Tiny, dark, completely magnificent. He had found it specifically for me. I remember standing in the middle of it thinking, this person pays attention. This person is going to matter. I was right about the mattering. I was wrong about what kind. We dated for 2 years. They were genuinely good years. He was reliable in a way I had not experienced before. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered things that mattered to me. My mother's birthday, the name of my favorite student that year, the anniversary of the day my father died. He remembered all of it without being reminded. He was kind to people who had nothing to offer him, waiters, parking attendants, the woman at the dry cleaner who always got his name wrong no matter how many times he spelled it out. He was patient with all of them. That had always meant something to me. You can tell a great deal about a person by how they treat the people they do not need. He proposed on a Sunday afternoon in Centennial Park. We had been walking for an hour and he just stopped in the middle of the path. He said, I have been trying to figure out the right moment for 3 months, and I have decided there is no right moment, so I'm just going to do it now. He got down on one knee right there with joggers running past us and an old man walking a very large dog who stopped to watch. I said yes before he even finished the question. The old man with the dog started clapping. I will never forget that. We got married in the spring. Small wedding, 70 people. A restored barn venue outside Nolensville that I had fallen in love with the first time I saw it. The beams were original. The floor was worn smooth by 100 years of feet. I remember standing in the doorway before I walked in and thinking, this place feels like something that lasts. My mother cried from the moment she saw me in my dress. His mother, Margaret, cried from the moment I walked in. His father, Robert, shook my hand afterward and said, welcome to the family. He said it simply and he meant it completely. I felt it. I really felt it. The feeling of being genuinely welcomed somewhere. We went to Italy for our honeymoon. 2 weeks. Rome and the Amalfi Coast and a small town near Positano that Chris had read about and insisted we find. We got lost 3 times looking for it. We laughed every time. That trip felt like proof of something, that we were the kind of people who could get lost together and be fine about it. We came back and we built our life. We bought a house in East Nashville, a 2-bedroom craftsman on a street lined with old oak trees that dropped leaves every October in a way that felt like something from a film. The porch needed work. The back garden needed more. We did both together. We spent a whole autumn Saturday replacing boards on the porch, and by the end of the day we were both covered in sawdust and laughing at how little we actually knew about carpentry. I have a photograph from that day. We looked so happy in it. We looked so easy. We had dinner parties. We had Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers spread across the bed. We had a running joke about the neighbor's cat that used to sit on our back fence and stare at us with what we decided was deep, philosophical contempt. We had small rituals that belonged only to us, the kind of small rituals that make a life feel like yours. I loved him. I want to say that clearly. I loved him for a long time. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest of this story, because what I did later came from a woman who had loved someone completely and been completely betrayed. And that is different from anger. It is slower than anger. It is colder, and it is much more precise. I teach literature. I teach my students to read between the lines, to notice what a character does not say as much as what they do, to pay attention to the space between what someone performs and what they actually feel, to look at the detail that seems small and ask what it is doing in the larger story. I am good at this. I cannot turn it off. It is not a choice I make. I simply notice things. I notice when something has changed. I notice when something that used to be one way is now a different way. I notice the detail that does not quite fit. The change in Chris started in year 6. It was subtle, so subtle that I spent months telling myself I was misreading it, that I was bringing my professional habits home where they did not belong, that not everything in life was a text to be analyzed, but some things you cannot unknow once you have seen them. He started coming home differently. Not later, exactly, just differently. There was a quality to his energy when he walked in the door that had changed, a kind of careful composure, like someone managing a transition, like someone making sure the previous version of themselves is properly put away before they step back into this version. I noticed it the first time it happened. I could not have said exactly what it was, just that something was different, just that the man who walked through the door felt slightly like a performance of himself rather than the real thing. I noticed that. I filed it away. I said nothing. He started putting his phone face down on the table. Before, it would sit there screen up. I could always see when a message came in. Now it was always face down. Always. Every dinner. Every evening on the sofa. I noticed it the first time it happened. I noticed it every time after that, too. He started taking phone calls in the garage, not in the living room anymore, not in the kitchen. The garage. With the door closed, he would say, "Sorry, work call," and disappear, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes longer. I would hear the low murmur of his voice through the wall, but not the words. He started showering the moment he came home from certain trips, not after he had settled in, not after we had said hello properly, immediately. He would walk in, drop his bag, go straight to the bathroom. I would hear the water running before he had even taken off his coat. He started sleeping more deeply. That sounds like nothing, but it was not nothing. He had always been a light sleeper. Any small sound in the night, and he was awake. Suddenly, he was sleeping through everything, deeply, peacefully, the sleep of someone with absolutely nothing troubling their conscience. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself that over and over, for months, because as long as I believed I was imagining things, the marriage was still intact, and the life we had built together was still real, and the man who had found me a bookshop on Charlotte Avenue because I had mentioned it once was still the man I had married. I was not imagining things. My best friend Claire did not believe me when I said I was fine. She had never fully trusted Chris. She had a feeling about him from the very beginning that she never said directly, but that I always knew was there. She would look at me sometimes with this expression and say, "Addie, you can see it too." And I would say, "Claire, I'm fine." And she would go quiet. The way she always did when she was letting me have something she knew was not true. I called her one evening from my car parked in the school lot after everyone had gone home. I did not plan to call her. I just sat in the car after a long day, and I stared at the steering wheel, and I thought, I cannot keep saying I'm fine. I cannot keep saying it. She answered on the first ring. I did not say anything for a moment. She said, "Addie, tell me." I said, "Something is wrong. I don't have proof, but something is wrong." She said, "I know. I have known for months. I just needed you to know it too." We sat on the phone together for an hour. We did not come to any conclusions. We did not make any plans. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who would not tell me I was imagining things. I was not imagining things. He disappeared on a Friday morning in October. I was in my third period class. We were reading Hamlet. I had just asked my students what they thought it meant that Hamlet keeps putting off the thing he knows he has to do. A girl in the front row said, "Maybe he loves the person he has to confront more than he loves the truth." I told her that was exactly right. By the time I got to my phone at lunch, there were no messages. That was not unusual. We did not text constantly during the day, but something felt wrong. One of those feelings you cannot explain but cannot ignore. I texted him. Nothing. I called. It went straight to voicemail. I taught my afternoon classes. I could not concentrate. I kept telling myself it was nothing. He was probably in a meeting. He had probably left his phone on silent. I drove home after school. His car was in the driveway. His phone was on the nightstand. His wallet was exactly where he always left it. His jacket was hanging by the door. Everything was there. Except Chris. I felt sick. I felt cold. I stood in our hallway and I looked at all of his things in all of their right places, and I thought, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? I called his work. He had not been in all day. I called his brother. Nobody had heard from him. I called Claire. She said, "I'm coming over." I called Margaret. She started crying before I finished my second sentence. I filed a missing person report that evening. The officer I spoke to was kind. He said most missing adults turn up within 72 hours. He said there was no sign of anything troubling. He said to keep calling around and to try to get some rest. I did not get any rest. I sat in the living room that Friday night and I waited. I watched the front door. I listened for his car. I called hospitals. I called his college friends one by one. I sat there until 4 in the morning and then I sat there some more. I kept thinking about his phone on the nightstand, his wallet, his car. The things a person takes when they leave voluntarily were all still here. I told myself that meant something. I told myself that meant he had not chosen to go, that something had happened to him, that he was somewhere he did not want to be, and that he needed me to find him. I drove the streets near our house on Saturday morning. For 2 hours, I drove slowly through East Nashville looking for something I could not name. I do not know what I thought I would find. I just could not sit still any longer. Margaret and Robert came on Saturday afternoon. Margaret held my hands across the kitchen table and we sat together in the not knowing, which is the worst place in the world to be. I felt sick. I felt cold. I felt something very close to terror that I was working extremely hard to contain, because if I let it out, it would become real, and I needed it to not be real. Robert kept standing up and sitting down. He would stand up and walk to the window and look out at the street, and then sit back down. He did not know what to do with his body. Neither did I. Sunday came and went. Nothing. I went to school on Monday. I do not know how. I stood at the front of my classroom and I taught and I answered questions and I graded a pop quiz, and the whole time I was thinking, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? I drove home on Monday afternoon and the whole drive I was bargaining with something. Just let him be there. Just let him be home. I do not care about anything else. Just let him be there. And then, on Monday evening, the front door opened. He hung up his jacket, he set his keys on the hook, he turned around, and he looked at me like a stranger. The hospital kept him overnight. The doctors were thorough. They ran tests. They assessed his memory carefully and methodically. What they found was consistent with dissociative amnesia, a condition where the mind, under extreme psychological stress, seals off a section of memory as a protective measure. The brain essentially decides that certain memories are too painful or too complicated to hold and partitions them away. He remembered his childhood, his parents, his brother, his life up to about 22. After that, nothing. Just white space where the last 12 years should have been. The doctors said it could happen. They said it was rare, but documented. They said his memory might return gradually through familiar environments, familiar routines, familiar faces. They said the most important thing was not to overwhelm him, to be patient, to give him time. They sent him home with me. I want to tell you what it felt like to bring my husband home knowing he did not know he was my husband. It felt like being a ghost in your own life. I showed him around the house, our house, the house we had chosen together, renovated together, lived in together for 7 years. He walked through each room carefully, politely, the way you walk through someone else's home when you are a guest and you are trying to be respectful of their things. He said, "It's a nice house." I said, "Thank you." He looked at the photographs on the mantelpiece. Our wedding photograph. The one from Italy. The one Claire took of us at the Christmas market the year before last. He looked at each one without recognition and set them back down. I made up the guest room. I could not put him in our bed. I could not lie beside a stranger in the bed I had shared with my husband. He thanked me for the guest room with genuine warmth, like someone grateful for a kind host's hospitality. I closed my bedroom door that night. I sat on the edge of our bed. I felt a grief I did not have a name for, not the grief of losing someone, something stranger than that, the grief of someone who is still right there in front of you and is gone anyway. I did not sleep. I lay in our bed and I listened to the house. I heard him in the guest room, a cough, the creak of the bed, and I lay there and I thought, this is my husband. He is 12 feet away, and I am completely alone. The days that followed were strange, quiet and strange. Chris was present in the house but absent in every way that mattered. He was polite. He was gentle. He was easy to be around. He helped with dishes. He offered to do the shopping. He thanked me for every meal. He asked about my day with apparent interest. He was the perfect house guest. He was not my husband. Margaret came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She would sit with him at the kitchen table and show him family photographs. Their holiday in Florida when he was 10, his high school graduation, the day he bought his first car. She would tell him stories about each one and watch his face for something, some flicker, some crack in the blankness. She would cry quietly and he would hold her hand with a gentleness that made everything worse somehow. I watched all of this. I watched him comfort her. I watched him be kind to her. And I felt sick. I felt cold. I felt something I could not name. Because something was wrong, not the amnesia. The amnesia might have been real. I told myself it might be real. I told myself this over and over in those first days. I had no reason to doubt it. The doctors believed it. Margaret and Robert believed it. Claire believed it. But I could not turn off the part of my brain that was watching, that was noticing, that was cataloging every small thing. And what I was noticing did not match what the doctors had described. I researched. That is what I do when something does not add up. I research until I understand it. I spent 2 nights reading medical papers and case studies and first-hand accounts from people who had genuinely experienced dissociative amnesia. I read everything I could find. Real amnesia is not calm. That was the first thing I learned. A person who genuinely cannot access 12 years of their life is frightened. They are disoriented. They reach for a memory and find nothing and stumble. They ask desperate questions because the gap is unbearable. The confusion spills out at unexpected moments. It is messy and unpredictable and frightening. Chris was not frightened. He was calm. He was settled. He slept perfectly every single night. He ate well. He smiled easily. He watched television in the evenings with a contentment that did not match his situation. A man who has lost 12 years of his life is not content. I noticed the language he used when he talked about his missing years. It was too precise, too consistent. When I asked him questions about his past, he would pause at exactly the right moments. He would furrow his brow with exactly the right degree of effort. He would say, "I'm not sure," or "There's something there, but I can't quite reach it." Real confusion is messier than that. It does not pause at exactly the right moment every single time. Real confusion is not well rehearsed. And he never asked the questions. If you woke up tomorrow with no memory of the last 12 years, you would be desperate for information. You would want to know everything: who you were, what you had done, who the people in your life were, and how you had come to be with them. You would ask and ask and ask because the gap would be unbearable. Chris never asked. He accepted his situation with a calmness that I could not stop thinking about. He did not press me for details. He did not lie awake at night, consumed by the not knowing. He was simply comfortable, day after day, in the house he claimed not to recognize, with the woman he claimed not to know. I said nothing. I kept watching. I started testing him, quietly, carefully. I left our wedding photograph on the kitchen counter one morning. I did not point it out. I did not mention it. I just left it there and went to make coffee. When I came back, he had moved it slightly. He had picked it up and looked at it and set it back down. When I casually mentioned it later, he said he did not recognize the people in it. His hands had shaken slightly when he set it down. I mentioned the name of his closest friend from college, just dropping it into a sentence as if it were nothing. His eyes moved, just for a fraction of a second, a flicker of recognition that he immediately controlled. Then the careful blank expression settled back over his face like a curtain being drawn. I mentioned the restaurant where he had proposed, not directly. I just said, "I drove past that place on Fifth Avenue today, the place with the blue awning." He said, "Oh." Nothing else. But he stopped chewing for just a moment. Just one moment. I mentioned the name of his brother's wife, a woman he had known for 15 years. He said, "I don't think I remember her." But his jaw tightened slightly when I said her name. Just slightly. Just for a second. I started keeping notes. It is a teacher's habit. Date, observation, detail, interpretation. I filled 3 pages in 2 weeks. The picture was becoming very clear, and it was not the picture the doctors had painted. I felt sick knowing what I was beginning to understand. I felt cold. I sat across from him at dinner every evening, and I smiled, and I passed him bread, and I asked about his day. And underneath all of that, I felt the truth settling in my chest, like something heavy and cold that would not move. He was not sick. He remembered everything. He was performing, not remembering. And he was doing it in my house, at my table, with my mother-in-law crying across from him twice a week because she believed her son was gone. I said nothing. I kept watching. I kept building. On a Wednesday evening in the 3rd week, I was tidying the hallway. Chris had been with us for 22 days by then. Margaret had come that afternoon. She had brought soup. She had cried quietly for most of an hour. He had held her hand the whole time and told her it was going to be okay. I was tidying the hallway after they had both gone to their rooms. I picked up his coat, the coat he had been wearing when he walked back through the door that Monday evening 3 weeks earlier. I had not touched it since. It had been hanging exactly where he put it. I checked the pockets. My mother's habit. She taught it to me when I was a teenager, and I have never stopped. Left pocket. Nothing. Right pocket. A receipt. From a parking garage. In Memphis. Dated the Friday he disappeared. I stood in the hallway holding that receipt, and I felt the whole architecture of the last 3 weeks shift. Memphis. 2 hours from Nashville. A parking garage. The Friday he vanished. I felt sick. I felt cold. My hands were completely still, but inside everything was moving very fast. I stood there for a long time, just standing, just holding that small piece of paper and understanding what it meant. It meant he had not disappeared. He had gone somewhere. He had driven somewhere and parked in a garage and spent 3 days doing something I did not know about, and then driven back and walked through our front door and looked me in the eyes and said, "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" I folded the receipt. I put it in my own pocket. I hung the coat back up exactly as it was. I went to the kitchen and I made dinner. I called Chris in when it was ready. We ate together. We talked about a program he had been watching. I was completely calm. Inside, I was building something. I know how to research. I know how to follow a thread. I know that every story has an internal logic, and that if you find the right loose end and pull it, the whole thing unravels. I do this with texts. I do this with my students. I had never had to do it with my own husband before. I started with the parking garage. I found it online. A multi-story car park in Midtown Memphis, 2 blocks from a residential area. I looked at the surrounding streets, restaurants, a gym, coffee shops, apartment buildings. I made the calls I needed to make from my car during my lunch break so Chris would not hear. Methodical, patient, without emotion. I needed to find something solid before I did anything. I needed to be so certain there was no possible way for him to deny it. No room for him to say it was a misunderstanding or a coincidence. I needed everything. I found it on the second week. An apartment in a building on Cooper Street in Midtown Memphis, leased 8 months ago. The name on the lease was not Chris's name. It was a version of his middle name, combined with his mother's maiden name. A name that would mean nothing to anyone who did not know him. A name that I recognized immediately. 8 months. He had been building this for 8 months. I found her name through the building's directory. I'm not going to tell you her name. It does not matter. What matters is that she existed. What matters is that for 8 months, my husband had been driving 2 hours to Memphis and being someone else, and then driving 2 hours back and walking through our front door and being my husband. For 8 months, I had been sitting at my kitchen table, grading essays about truth and honesty in literature and thinking I was losing my mind. I did not cry when I found out. I sat in my car in the school parking lot and I looked at the information on my phone and I felt something go very quiet inside me, the quietest I have ever been in my life. I felt sick. I felt cold. I felt a grief I had no name for. I felt something that was not quite anger because anger is hot, and what I felt was not hot. It was cold, precise, clear. I drove home. I made dinner. I set the table. I had one more thing to do. I called Margaret. I asked her and Robert to come to dinner on Saturday evening. I told her I had something I needed them to understand. My voice must have carried something because she did not ask any questions. She just said, "Of course, we will be there." I spent that week being completely normal. I made meals. I watched television with Chris in the evenings. I asked him how he was sleeping. I was kind. Not because I felt kind, because I needed 5 more days and I was not going to do anything to interrupt them. I thought about what I was going to say. I rehearsed it the way I rehearse a lesson, not the exact words, the order, the logic, the thing I needed them to understand, and the sequence in which they needed to understand it. I thought about Margaret, about the Tuesdays and Thursdays she had come and cried quietly and shown photographs. I thought about what it was going to cost her to hear the truth. I felt genuinely sick thinking about it, not because she did not deserve the truth. She deserved it completely, but because she was innocent. She had done nothing wrong. She had loved her son and believed what he told everyone. What I was about to do to her belief in him was something I could not prevent and could not be sorry for and still felt the weight of. I thought about Robert standing up and sitting down in my kitchen the weekend Chris disappeared. I thought about that father who did not know what to do with his body because his son was missing. I thought about what he was about to find out about the person he had raised. I thought about all of that every day that week, and then I went back to the kitchen and made dinner. Saturday evening, I spent the afternoon cooking. I made his favorite meal, the one he had asked me to make every year on his birthday. I set the table carefully. 2 places, candles, the good wine glasses. I put on music he had always loved. He came downstairs at 6:30 and stopped in the doorway. Something crossed his face, so fast I almost missed it. A recognition so deep and so involuntary that his whole body responded before his mind could stop it. His shoulders dropped slightly. His face softened. For just 1 second, he was completely himself. The man who had stood in the kitchen doorway with 2 cups of coffee while I painted walls. The man who had found a bookshop on Charlotte Avenue because I had mentioned it once. Then the curtain came back down. He said, "This looks wonderful. You didn't have to do all this." I said, "Sit down, Chris." He sat. I poured the wine. I sat across from him. I looked at him for a long moment. He looked back at me with the careful, polite expression he had been wearing for 3 weeks. I said, "I know you remember everything." He did not respond immediately. He did the thing he always did, the pause, the furrowed brow. He said, "I'm not sure what you mean." I said, "I found the receipt from the parking garage in Memphis, in your coat pocket. I found the apartment on Cooper Street, the lease in your mother's maiden name. I know about the last 8 months. I know all of it." The silence that followed was the longest silence of our marriage. He looked at the table. He did not look at me. He did not perform the confusion anymore. There was no point. We both knew it. I said, "I need you to understand something. I have known for 2 weeks. I have sat across from you at this table every evening for 2 weeks, knowing everything I just told you. I have made you comfortable. I have been kind to you. I have watched your mother cry over a condition you invented. I did all of that because I needed to be completely certain before I said a single word." He looked up at me then. His eyes were wet. He said, "Adeline, I'm so sorry." I said, "I know you are." And then we heard the front door. I had not planned for them to hear it from the hallway. I had planned to tell them at the table, with everything laid out clearly, the receipt, the lease document, my notes, everything organized the way I organize things when I need to be absolutely understood. But Margaret and Robert arrived a few minutes early. They let themselves in with the key I had given them years ago. They came quietly because they always came quietly. They never wanted to disturb us. They heard everything from the hallway. I did not know they were there until I heard Margaret make a sound I had never heard from her before in 8 years of knowing her. Not a word, not a cry exactly, just a sound. The sound a person makes when something they have believed in completely is suddenly gone. Robert appeared in the doorway first. His face was something I will never forget. Not anger exactly, not grief exactly. Something older than both of those, something heavier. The expression of a man who has raised a son for 38 years and is seeing him clearly for the first time and wishing with everything he has that he could not. Margaret came to stand beside him. She looked at Chris for a very long time. Chris could not look back at her. He could not do it. Robert said quietly, "How long?" Chris said nothing. I said, 8 months. He has been driving to Memphis for 8 months. The amnesia was not real. He came back on Monday knowing exactly who I was and chose to continue the lie. Margaret sat down very slowly in the chair by the door, like a woman whose legs have simply decided they are done for today. Robert said, "Christopher, look at me." Chris looked at his father. Robert said, "You are going to tell her everything. Tonight. All of it." Then he took Margaret's hand. He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes said something his mouth could not. Then they left. He told me everything. It took 2 hours. The woman in Memphis, how they met, how it started, when it started, how many times he had gone there, what he had told her about his life, what he had told himself about mine. I listened. I did not interrupt him once. I asked questions when I needed clarification, and I let him answer fully before I asked anything else. I had spent 20 years teaching students to read a complete text before forming a conclusion. I was not going to stop now. When he finished, I sat with everything he had said for a long moment. Then I said, "Why the amnesia?" He looked at his hands. He said, "I didn't know how to leave. I couldn't find the words for the conversation. I thought if I came back like that, there would be a kind of clean break, that you could start over without it being something I had done to you deliberately, that it would just be something that happened, something neither of us chose." I looked at him for a long time. I said, "You thought pretending not to know me would be easier for me than the truth." He said, "I know how that sounds now." I said, "I need you to hear something. You did not protect me from a painful conversation. You made me a woman whose husband disappeared. You made me file a missing person report. You made me call hospitals at midnight. You made me drive through our neighborhood on a Saturday morning looking for you. You made your mother cry twice a week for 3 weeks over a condition you invented. You sat at this table every evening and looked me in the eyes and performed something that real people suffer from. You used something devastating as a costume. And you did all of that because you could not find the courage to sit across from me and have a 2-hour conversation." He had no answer for that. I slid the folder across the table. The receipt, the lease document, my notes, the timeline I had built over 2 weeks of careful, quiet work. I said, "My attorney has a copy of all of this. She filed this morning. You will want to get your own attorney before you sign anything." He looked at the folder. He looked at me. I stood up. I blew out the candles. I carried the dishes to the kitchen. I washed them. I dried them. I put them away. The way I always put things away. Carefully. In the right places. When I came back to the dining room, he was gone. The divorce took 7 months. It was not simple. Nothing about it was simple. But it was honest in a way that the last year of the marriage had not been. And there was a relief in that I had not expected, a kind of cleanness, like a window opened in a room that has been closed too long. Margaret called me 3 days after the dinner. She cried for a long time. I let her cry. She said things she did not have to say. She said, "You are the wronged person in all of this. Adeline and I need you to know that we know that." I said, "I know you do, Margaret." I said, "That means more than you realize." I meant it. Robert sent me a card. Just a card. 3 sentences. He said he was sorry. He said I had handled everything with more dignity than his son deserved. He said he hoped I would be okay. I kept that card for a long time. I kept it in the drawer of my desk at school. Sometimes I would open it and read those 3 sentences and feel the weight of what a decent person looks like, what it feels like to be seen clearly by someone who has every reason to protect their own. I went back to school. My students did not know anything had changed. I stood at the front of my classroom and taught unreliable narrators. I taught the gap between what a character tells us and what the text actually shows us. I stood there every day and thought, I could write the exam questions for this unit from personal experience. There were hard days. I want to be honest about that. There were mornings when I woke up and for just a second I forgot everything that had happened. Just a second where the morning was normal and the house was ours and the life was still what I had believed it to be. And then I remembered. And the remembering was a different kind of hurt every time. I let myself feel it. I did not pretend I was fine. I called Claire on the hard mornings. She never made me feel like I should be further along than I was. She just listened. She just stayed on the phone until I was ready to get up and go. The house sold in March. It sold quickly. A young couple. They looked at it on a Tuesday and made an offer on Thursday. I watched them walk through the rooms that had been mine for 7 years, and I thought, I hope they are happy here. I genuinely thought that. I did not feel bitter about it. The house was not the problem. The house had been good. I found an apartment in Germantown, 2 bedrooms, a small balcony facing east that caught the morning light in a way that felt like a specific kindness. On the first morning I woke up there, I made coffee and sat on that balcony and watched the sky go from gray to pink to gold, and I thought, this is the first morning of something that is entirely mine. It did not feel like triumph. It felt like relief. The deep, bone-level relief of someone who has been carrying something heavy for so long, they forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. It is a Sunday morning now. I am at my kitchen table with my coffee and a stack of essays. My students are reading The Great Gatsby this semester. They are at the part where the lie at the center of everything finally becomes impossible to sustain, where the careful construction falls apart, where the truth that has always been there simply cannot stay hidden any longer. I am reading through the stacks slowly. Most of the essays are good. My students are smart and they work hard, and I am proud of them in the specific way you are proud of people you have watched grow. I get to one essay near the bottom of the pile. A girl in my third period class. She is 16. She is the kind of student who sees things that other students walk past. She wrote something that makes me stop. She wrote, "The most frightening thing about Gatsby is not that he lied. It is that he believed his own lie so completely that he forgot what the truth looked like. He did not think of himself as a deceiver. He thought of himself as someone who had simply decided who he was going to be." I read it twice. I sit back in my chair. I think about Chris standing in the hallway on that Monday evening, his jacket hung up, his keys on the hook, the careful blank expression he had been practicing. I think about how he walked through our house like a guest, how he slept perfectly every night, how he sat across from me at dinner and looked at me with polite uncertainty. I think about what she wrote. He thought of himself as someone who had simply decided who he was going to be. I think about whether that is true, whether by the end Chris had stopped thinking of himself as a man who was lying and started thinking of himself as simply a man who had started over, whether the performance had become something he could no longer fully separate from whatever was real underneath it. I do not know the answer to that. I am not sure it matters now. What I know is that I am sitting in my own apartment on a Sunday morning with good coffee and a stack of essays from students I care about and a balcony that catches the morning light. What I know is that I taught myself to read between the lines a long time ago, and that skill did not fail me when I needed it most. What I know is that some things cannot stay hidden forever, no matter how carefully they are constructed. I pick up my red pen. I write excellent in the margin. I underline it twice. I get up to make more coffee.